Well, good morning, everybody, once again. Thank you very much for coming. It is June 13th, and we are opening the Japanese Politics 101 room with Timothy Langley and me, Maya Matsuoka, as a host. This morning again, Timothy will walk us through the latest developments in Japanese politics and public affairs. He's going to talk about things which are kind of in the news, but not all of them are anyway. So thank you very much again. I would like to say that today we are celebrating 4 months of having this room open. So we have been running since February 13th every Sunday. And of course, we intend to continue doing this. Last week, the room had 300 attendees. We're very grateful for that. We were delighted to see the analytics. Hopefully, we will continue to maintain the interest in the room. Of course, since I talk too much, today I'm going to keep quiet and let Timothy talk about the stuff he has prepared to talk about. Timothy, please go ahead.
You are so funny. I think people only join this room because they laugh so much at the things that you have to say, Maya.
Haha.
Thank you. So yes, I'd like to say thank you to everybody who is signed on to the room. What we found out last week in the analytics was we've got a lot of really great people, like all the people that are in the room right now, and then we got a bunch of lazy heads who signed on right in the around the half-hour time, and then by 9 o'clock we're fully up to speed. And usually the audience maintains until we sign off. We went really long last time, which was great for me, but maybe not for everybody else. But still the audience stuck around. So I will keep the room open. Maya will keep the room open until she gets sick of it or the cat needs her to pay attention to her. But we'll just take it as it rolls. I've got 4 main topics that I'd like to talk about today, and as I predicted, even week to week, there's so much going on, so much to talk about. I'd like to limit my conversations to just COVID, Olympics, what's going on with Mr. Suga, and geopolitics, the ramifications with just our nearby neighbors, and of course the U.S.-Japan relationship. And then wrap that up because I'm absolutely certain there are lots of other issues that you want to talk about that are not in my opening remarks. They're very interesting to talk about that are reported but kind of not reported. For example, the Toshiba incident about let's get those foreigners, and the poor fellow that's with the Olympic Committee, the finance guy who jumped in front of a train just after we had our last clubhouse meeting Monday morning, which is kind of the hot time for suicides in Japan, if you know anything about that topic. But let's open it up for my main topics, and as usual, I will end each one with a request for any questions or comments. I hardly ever get those, which is great. And then we wrap it up and then open the room. So with that, I'd like to just go into COVID. So if you're watching things carefully, you see that there has been a ground shift in how the pandemic is being handled. You notice that since Monday, that all of a sudden it looks visually like the Olympics are going to go on. They have announced the teams for the Japanese Olympics. Mr. Suga has received endorsements from other leaders. Really importantly, the State Department took Japan down from a level 4 to a level 3. That was 2 weeks. It lasted 2 weeks, amazingly enough. So these are pretty significant. We have the state of emergency that ends on the 20th of this month. So today is what, the 13th, so in another week. The Olympics starts on, July 30th. So things are starting to form up. I've got a siren going on in the background. I apologize. I'm not sure what that means. The rollout for the vaccines, Mr. Suga has announced, and I think he feels very confident of this, that 65 years and older people will be all inoculated throughout the country by July 30th. And that's pretty brisk. I think they'll be able to make it. And then everybody in the nation will be inoculated by by November of this year. It's good news, but it's not in enough volume or fast enough to help Mr. Suga in his elections or to help the Olympics be, with lots of spectators. So that's kind of too bad. But the rollout is taking speed, as everybody would predict, with the Japanese finally getting around to stop having all of the meetings and debating it and finally getting a game plan. So the SDF have set up centers to supplement what's going on in the various municipalities, and they are going gangbusters. They've sent out slips for the people, the 65 years and older people, to get their inoculations. But they've said, it's moving very briskly. A lot of the old people have made a reservation, then they don't show up or they get lost, and then we have people that just walk in. So just come in, just walk in is kind of the message that they're getting. So they're running it really like the ticketing at Disneyland. It's going very efficiently. So I think we can see great progress with COVID, which leads me into what's going on with the Olympics, which is my next topic. So with that, I would just like to close up COVID, see if anybody has any questions, or if you want to just hold on to it until we finish this round. So I will open the floor and close it. You guys are so great. Getting on to the Olympics. So the teams were selected. There are 33 Olympic events. There are 600 Japanese athletes, as everybody knows. I'm sure you know. But you will be knowing their names pretty quickly. Whether we're going to have visitors in the stands or not, they're beginning to soften that hard line. The questioning that Mr. Suga took in the diet, I will be talking about that later. A lot of the questioning came in on the handling of COVID rollout and on the hosting of the Olympics, mostly coming from the opposition party, as you can expect. But it remains to be seen, although the news is coming out. So I think what's happening is, if you're watching the press, if you're following the news, if you're listening to this program, you'll be noticing a gradual, enthusiasm being built, probably created by Dentsu, of how the Olympic teams are coming in and how great the Olympics are going to be, and personality pieces on somebody that's in the Olympics who has suffered through so many hardships and finally they're on the Olympic team. There are some problems, though. So you remember the controversy with the Olympic organizers in the Olympic headquarters deciding, Tokyo's going to be awful hot. Let's do the walking and a marathon events in Sapporo. Thank you very much. And just took the Japanese by surprise. I'm sure everybody remembers that. So now comes the time for this to actually be put into motion. We're less than 2 months away from the Olympics starting, and the people in Sapporo are just saying, we're not ready. The hospitals, we don't have firm control over the hospitals for them to volunteer to, for us to support and supplement what's going on there. And by the way, we are the number 2 highly infected regions of Japan. And of the new serious cases, 2/3 of them are in Sapporo. So what the hell are you guys doing? But the decision was already made. It was made without much consultation with the Prime Minister or with Koike. And as everybody knows, the marathon, it's one of the highlight of the events, and they already, gosh, it's just amazing. So they already paved and repainted a lot of the roads that are on the marathon path so that it's not as reflective and heat absorbing as normal. So when they're running through Tokyo in late July, they can conserve some of their. They already did that, and then for the IOC to just say, "Let's do Sapporo," a real slap in the face. So there's a little bit of animosity that's going on there. You can see it from time to time. You know, the cartoon caricatures of the IOC president are sometimes pretty funny. But Sapporo is going to have a little bit of a hard time. The Japanese government in the Diet is sensitive to that, and now they figure they need to have a law where they can force these hospitals that are not run by the government. So I don't know if everybody knows this or appreciates it, but although there's a national health insurance program for all Japanese citizens, the hospitals themselves have not been nationalized. So the government can't, the policies of the government can't be, they can be accepted by these various hospitals and clinics, but they're independent bodies. So now the Japanese government, in its wisdom, has decided, look, if they won't do what we want, let's pass a law. So that's what they're doing, to force these hospitals and clinics to accept COVID patients, and also, as is typical, to impose fines on violators. So another bill was passed through the Diet as well, that it's not typically directed at hospitals, but it can be applied there. But it's for these people, these nasty people, these people who aren't following the rules and covering their mouths and washing their hands, who serve alcoholic drinks when they're not supposed to, when they keep their establishments open when they're not supposed to, when they walk across the street without looking both ways and the signal is still red. So there's a little bit of tightening going on there, and you see it other places in Japanese politics, maybe Japanese society. It comes up every once in a while. It's quickly smoothed over so that you don't really notice it. We will be talking about it, I'm sure, in the open discussion. I'm talking specifically about the Toshiba case that kind of broke through on Thursday and Friday. So I think you can see that the Japanese political machine has decided we are going to do the Olympics. So you remember last week it was go, no go. I was kind of leaning towards it's going to be a go. It looks like they're going to go. 2-3 weeks earlier, I was of the mind that it's probably not going to go. The state of emergency, the United States kind of slapping the Japanese by saying, we're going to move you to a level 4, which is don't travel to this country. That is their travel advisory. Do not avoid traveling to this country. That lasted 2 weeks, and that's fallen down stone. If you need to make a guess, it looks like, yes, the Olympics will be held come, hell or high water. The Japanese will push it through, and we'll take our lumps as they come. So still a lot to be seen there. The amount of a hit that the economy will take if they don't hold the Olympics versus if they hold the Olympics, that has already been done. So I think they've made a decision that is pretty irrevocable at this point in time. So with that, I'd like to close up the Olympics and move on to Mr. Suga, unless there are any questions or comments. Great, thank you very much. So let's talk about Mr. Suga. So he was in the hot seat. Boy, it's not nice. It's not easy to be Mr. Suga, who is coincidentally he's in England now with the G7. So he was in the hot seat Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And the way that works is in the Diet, towards the end of the Diet session. So the Diet session will end next week. 150 days for the Diet. It starts probably around January 5th or January 6th. The emperor comes into the Diet chamber, to the chamber that's on the upper house side of the chamber. There are two chambers, the upper house and the lower house. They look almost identical, except the upper house has a nice throne behind the speaker's podium, and they open the curtains there, and the emperor sometimes sits there, but Usually he doesn't. In fact, I don't think the chair has ever been used to sit in, but it's kind of a throne. And the emperor comes in and gets at the speaker's podium and opens the diet. It opens the 150-day diet session. The emperor, as part of his duties, is supposed to open and close the diet sessions. He's also supposed to accept ministers of the state, which is one of his duties. And just as a side note, just to kind of show off how much I know about it, the diet compound was completed in 1936. It almost crashed the entire budget of Japan. But in building it, they wanted, so it was the third one in a row. They had 2 or 3 of them. They burned down. They weren't big enough. Both of them actually burnt down. The second one in less than 2 years after it was built. So they decided, let's build it with real stones and make it really something magnificent. And they did. They succeeded in making something magnificent. The entire cost of that diet compound, about 10% of it is spent on only those aspects, those parts of the parliament building which are used by the emperor. So the only people that use that hallway or that go into that room or sit in that chair is the emperor. Of that, it consists of 10% of that entire budget. Pretty interesting, pretty magnificent. In any event, the diet will close in about 2 weeks, but before that, the prime minister is supposed to avail himself to questions from the opposition, and that's what happened on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. If you watch TV and you see it, it looks something like it's very polite. It's kind of a performance. It's not really a performance. It's kind of a performance because the questions are directed at the prime minister. They are submitted by the questionnaire days in advance, and answers are prepared. So if you see the opposition party, he will raise his hand. He's recognized. It's all kind of a skit. So raises his hand. He responds, asks his question. Then the prime minister would raise his hand because the question is directed to him, but it need not necessarily be the prime minister. Somebody else, one of the other ministers, could raise his hand. And if the questionnaire opposes that, he could say, I have an objection. The question was asked to the prime minister. So this goes on. It's tense because the cameras are there and everybody is listening to the words. So you need to follow the script that has been prepared by the bureaucrats, but sometimes you're speaking extemporaneously, and a lot can slip out during that time. So the big things that were coming out there, a lot of it is just the normal, just we don't like you, you did it this way, this is what you said you were going to do, and this is what actually happened. A lot of critical complaints. One of the things that didn't happen was a controversy that would incite the opposition to pull together to push for a no confidence motion against Mr. Suga. That didn't quite happen. They did say, we wanted an extension of this diet. There's so many things that we can talk about, we need to talk about. I don't think they won that fight. So there won't be an extension of this particular diet. It will close. At 150 days will be the end of it. And then we will roll into the Tokyo municipal elections, then quickly thereafter the Olympics. Then after that, probably the prime minister will call an election for the lower house. Sequentially, by law, by date, the election of the LDP president comes first. That needs to happen at the end of September. And the election of the lower house needs to happen in October. But since the prime minister can call the election at any time, probably he would call it before he has to go up as a candidate again. And in that regard, it looks like he will be a candidate. There is a huge battle forming between Abe and Mr. Nikai. Mr. Nikai is very powerful within the LDP. He holds office there. He's one of the longest surviving, meaning that he's had the most number of successful re-elections of all of the Diet members. So in Japanese politics, the more times you are elected, therefore the more powerful you become. It's just that kind of step transaction. And Mr. Nikai, he doesn't aspire to become prime minister or minister of state, that sort of thing. That's already well past his career. He is much more powerful. He's pretty much a kingmaker. So he likes the governor of Tokyo, Koike. They're very close, have been close for many years. And her bid to continue as governor and to win the election for her party, and also to burnish the relationship between her party and the LDP, which are different parties. She used to be LDP. She broke away. She left the Diet. She resigned. She ran for governor and she won. So she is a powerhouse to contend with. But she was initially a member of the parliament. Also, she was minister of state too. So they have a good relationship. Abe, on the other hand, is mad because Mr. Nikai took advantage of the situation and inserted Suga, which is, Mr. Abe's best pal. He was his chief cabinet secretary. But it went very quickly, and then Mr. Nikai inserted a lot of his own people into the Diet, into the LDP structure. So he continues to kind of enhance that by moving more quickly than the unorganized Abe component, which includes his favorite people who are in the cabinet now. So you might remember last week I talked about the magazine article where Mr. Abe was asked, who do you like as prime minister? Obviously, I guess Mr. Suga is okay with you, but what do you think about these other fellows? And he didn't mention those other fellows. He mentioned his friends. So there is a fight brewing there. It's not reported very much, but it is very much under the surface. And it could blow up into the open pretty quickly. Probably after the Tokyo Olympics, but it could become a feature of the before the Tokyo municipal elections. But it could blow up during those elections if this rift becomes a little bit more obvious. Finally, you might remember that there was an article in one of the weekly rags. Bunshin is the most noteworthy weekly rag. It's very popular. It's read by just about everybody. It has all the political news, economic news, scuttlebutt, movie theaters, that sort of thing. It's really a good production. And the second one is Shincho, which is also, they both come out on Thursdays. Everybody waits and picks them up as they go to work on Thursdays. There was a hit piece on Konotaro when we were talking last week, and there was supposed to be a follow-up article to that, and I picked mine up on my way to work on Thursday morning and looked through it, and there was no hit piece. There was no follow-up, which means that probably this story was pulled. They usually leave something really juicy for the second one, so it's terrifying for the person who is the target of their affection. It is used not only as a way to enhance sales, but also to make people do what you want them to do, or maybe just to make some extra money by pulling the story if enough money is paid for it. So it's that kind of a news reporting. When I talk with people in Europe about who come from Europe about that, they say, that would never happen in a magazine in Europe, where kind of bribery occurs. And it's not really bribery. It's just, I understand you had this piece on me and you're going to produce another one, and I would really like it if you didn't produce that other one. And the response to that is, but we've already got the writer, everything is done, and it would just cost so much money. I mean, for us to pull that story. Well, how much money would it cost to pull that story so that you don't have to suffer so poorly? From time to time, it's resolved that way. As with Mr. Konotaro, I don't know what happened, but I do understand that this was a hit piece to diminish his rising star, so that when the time to select the candidates for prime minister occurs again, maybe he has second thoughts. He's in the Aso faction. Mr. Taro Aso is deputy prime minister and also minister of finance. He's kind of the darling of that faction. You know, if it doesn't happen this time, maybe it's next time. Who knows?
Timothy,
Abe is definitely
okay. I'm sorry. I apologize for this. I believe that this is a connection problem. Hopefully, Timothy will be back soon. In the meantime, please think about questions and so that when Timothy comes back, we can talk with him. So I was oh, hello. Can you hear me again?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. We lost you for a while. And so I asked everybody, to think of questions to ask you while you were, on the other side of, I don't know, not off board, of course, but still.
You were so lucky that I fell off then.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So please continue.
So what was the last thing that you heard before I fell off?
That Konotaro is in Aso's faction. So that was the last thing. Yes.
So anyway, to wrap that up and get on to my final point, which is geopolitics. It remains to be seen. Oh gosh, I don't know what's going on with my bandwidth.
Be careful.
It remains to be seen if yeah, okay.
Sorry, it might be Bunshun, just listening over. You never know.
I'm never going to become prime minister after this. Oh my gosh. So anyway, let me wrap that up, because it sounds like my bandwidth is a little bit weak, intellectually as well as technically. So anyway, with that, let me just wrap that up and see if there are any questions.
Let's continue and keep the questions for afterwards.
Okay, thank you. So now I'm sitting on the deck, holding my iPhone high above my head so that I don't lose you guys. Let's talk just a little bit about geopolitics. There's a lot going on there, but we can cover it pretty quickly. You know that the G7 is going on in England now. All the leaders of the G7 are there. And Mr. Biden breaks off and has his powwow with Russia Premier Putin, I believe, tomorrow. And coincidentally enough, Friday was Russia's Establishment Day, so there was a lot of festivities going on there. So I think there's I don't know, I think Mr. Putin already knows what Mr. Biden is going to say to him, and Mr. Biden needs to be strong, quote, air quotes, be strong and control the relationship. I don't think there's a lot of anticipation of something coming out of that, but separate from that, the relationship between the United States and China continues to deteriorate. China is making moves to quell freedom of expression and free speech in Hong Kong. They're making uncomfortable pronouncements about joining Taiwan back to the motherland and the amount of defense spending that they're going through. So you'll remember that Japan spends less than 1% of its GDP on defense spending. The United States spends a little bit more than 2%, almost 2.5%. which is just enormous. But Japan being the third largest economy in the world, less than 1% is still a lot. And other countries are spending around 2%. Israel spends around 2%. China, on the other hand, as huge as that economy is spending 6%. And they're going to continue doing that for the next 30 years. I mean, that's the way they think. They think in 10-year, 50-year plans. And they've made pronouncements about, at least uniting the country by 2046. So that doesn't look good. They've launched 3 new ships this last week. The premier visited the shipyards to see the launching of these ships, which is a signal of itself. One of them is a brand new amphibious attack ship. Amphibious meaning that it's carrying ship material and soldiers for a beach assault. So it's a new class that's come out of the foundries there. A brand new ballistic missile submarine, and then a new type of destroyer. So this is pretty scary. And assuming you spend that much on military hardware, and you're in your third term as the leader of the country, you become a little bit uncomfortable not using all of that. So there's a human element of it too. So the likelihood of something happening in this region just continues to grow, and it makes people understandably nervous. In contrast to this, the United States has formed the Quad. The idea of the Quad actually came as a result of the tsunami that went into Southeast Asia, the Christmas Day tsunami. But it was for a different purpose. It's been kind of rejiggered to address the unified approach to dealing with China. The leaders met virtually just recently to talk about what they're going to do about it, and they decided to meet physically in the fall. So you'll start to see much more action on that. The war games, the projections are now becoming kind of mainstream topics of conversation. Different think tanks are publishing their results, and the public is very interested. So you're seeing some of that come out in the press now. What the strategy should be, understanding that if the Chinese want to move on Taiwan, they can do that. And what is the reality of that? How do we deal with that? Do we accommodate it and just accept that the Pacific has been split? Or do we confront it and put many lives at risk and still have something that's devastated but didn't let China get what it wanted? That's kind of the toss-up. North Korea, you'll note that North Korea has been pretty quiet recently. They were very proud that they didn't have any COVID cases, and they were very successful in keeping COVID out of the country. I don't know if that's accurate, but their relationship with China has cooled somewhat for a lot of different reasons, but trade has also been restricted as well. So I think that the great leader has other things keeping him busy rather than firing missiles into the Japan Sea. It looks like it's calmed down a bit there, and it doesn't look like we're going to have a lot of action. We thought that with the new President Biden in office, different from Trump, there might be some activity to kind of me too, don't forget me. That didn't happen, and the longer that Biden is in office without something like that happen, the more that it seems likely that it won't happen. And finally, in terms of geopolitics, that vaccine diplomacy, we've talked about this quite a bit, and it's indicative of how the world is beginning to address its issues. So vaccine diplomacy is an attempt by the United States on the one hand, but also China and Russia on the other, to bind their allies and their friends more closely together. The United States is big on this. Biden announced that he would be donating 1 billion vaccine doses to the countries that can't produce them or can't get them enough. Of all places, they donated a huge shipment to Mogadishu in Somalia, which is not everybody's. I mean, it's not even in the news that much. It's a government that it fails and then it regroups and it pulls itself together and it forms a government. And it's just a sad state of affairs there. But even they received vaccines. The Chinese are doing the same thing with Myanmar. So Myanmar is a lot of the Southeast Asian countries are complaining to the government of Myanmar. You know, you need to release the former leader of the pro-democracy movement and release all of the thousands of people you have in detention. And they're just thumbing their nose at it. And China is saying, you know, we deal with our neighbor in a forthright fashion. So they're getting all the help that they need. The sanctions that are being considered will be supplemented by China moving in more aggressively there, you can expect. There are other flashpoints that are out there, but I think those are the main ones. Geopolitically, we've got the G7, then we've got Biden and Putin. We've got the Prime Minister coming back and moving really quickly to the Tokyo metropolitan elections. But before that, the Prime Minister has got another 2 weeks of diet hearings. That's about it. I'd like to close up here. There are a lot of things that we could have talked about that I didn't. Maybe you'll bring them up in the question. It'll be a richer exchange, and you don't have to listen to me talk all the time. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maya.
Thank you. Mayuko, good morning.
Good morning, Maya, Timothy. Thank you so much for this interesting discussion, as always. I have a question, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to remember you had previously mentioned that out of all the potential candidates for the next Prime Minister, Motegi, who's the current Minister for Foreign Affairs, is in a good position. And about him, I remember two incidents. So one is last year when the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited Japan, and during the joint press conference, Wang made some comments about the 2 fishing boats that entered the sensitive waters of Senkaku Island, which were seen as quite controversial. And at that time, Motegi didn't really object to that, and he was criticized as being weak within the LDP party. And there was also another incident last year where he came under fire for questioning a particular foreign journalist's Japanese ability. The journalist asked him whether there was any scientific evidence for not allowing residents with foreign citizenship. And he was perhaps not prepared to answer that question. And the way he sort of not only avoided answering the question, but also belittled the journalist was criticized. And as I read more about him, I learned that he has a history of making kind of snarky remarks, I guess, especially towards foreign journalists. So here we can see him in 2 very different lights, and of course, under 2 different contexts, I understand that. But one is him as someone sort of weak, and another is someone who is a bit of a bully. So, and of course, everyone is multifaceted. But one thing I learned from you in this room is that it really depends on how the kingmakers like you or not. So my question is how Mr. Motegi is regarded within the LDP party, and especially among the kingmakers. Is he seen as someone very strong and capable, or otherwise? So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you've seen Mr. Abe put his arm around him. He is one of Abe's proteges. Going a little bit back farther in time, you might remember that he was almost sanctioned for his secretary receiving some money from a firm that was involved with the casinos, with the integrated resorts. It wasn't a whole lot of money, but the fellow who gave the money complained that I paid for something and I didn't get it. And that's how it broke into the story. Mr. Motegi said, look, I had nothing to do with that. That was my secretary. Had his secretary fall on the sword. He went underground for a bit. He complained of sickness. And then after a brief period of time, he came back again and became a minister of state. And then he became a second minister of state. And so almost, not all of them, but almost, all prime ministers eventually have held a foreign minister portfolio. It's one of the more powerful ones. And so he has that position now. He's not seen as a lightweight. He is snarky because he's just so smart. He's, everybody else is an idiot compared to him. Maybe that's true, but I think that's probably his view of it. So he doesn't, tolerate fools very easily. There are a lot of people like that in the parliament. So I think he is a very strong candidate. He kind of is like an older Kono Taro because he speaks English. He did his graduate work in the United States. He is a smart cookie, and I think he would make a good prime minister. But there are other people too. There's Shimomura. Like you said, it all depends on what the kingmaker's role is. How the kingmaker decides. And the kingmaker for the current prime minister was Mr. Nikai. And say what you will about Mr. Suga, that was a decision that happened within a 24-hour time frame. So yes, the kingmakers really hold a huge sway, more than the particular personalities of the candidates involved.
Thank you. So you said that he is like an older version of Kono Taro, and my perception is that somehow Kono Taro seems more popular than Motegi. Is it because of Motegi's, like you said, sort of snarkiness and he thinks he's the smartest cookie?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. That's part of it. But also, Motegi is he's been exercised more, been in the public eye more. Kono Taro is known as something of a maverick. I don't know if that's
right. You had
justified.
mentioned that, yes.
He's against nuclear power. He's a staunch ally of kind of reformist movement within the LDP. So the older people don't quite like that.
Right.
And so that's the dichotomy. But I think with more seasoning, he would kind of mature into a kind of Amari himself, because he's a smart guy, and he also is he doesn't suffer fools very easily.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your
that's
question and observation.
Thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you. Kumi, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, Maya. Good morning, Timothy. Good morning, Michael. Hello. Good morning.
Hey.
So thank you so much for an insight. And this is probably the first time I'm actually up on the stage asking a question. And I think thank you so much for having me up. I have two questions. So I've been learning far more. This is far more insightful than reading just the newspaper up there. And the term you mentioned, kingmaker, and right now Nikai is showing presence and power. So I'm just curious, how is Nikai powerful, and how did he gain so much power within LDP or within the politics in Japan? And the second question is that you mentioned when you touched based on geopolitics, that Japan only spends 1% of the national budget on military, and somewhere like Israel is 2%, and I recall China was 6% or something. So given that there's tension in South China Sea, should Japan be allocating more than 1% in military budget? So those are two questions.
What was the first question?
How did Mr. Nikai gain
Okay.
power? Yeah.
So the second question is more fun to answer. Let's talk about the first one. So Mr. Nikai is the head of the third largest faction in Japanese politics. So
Okay.
the largest faction is the Seiwakai. That's it's not headed by Mr. Abe, but it's his faction. It was created by his grandfather.
Hey.
And he's not the head because he couldn't. You're not supposed to be a member of a faction when you're prime minister. You're the member of the party, and you're supposed to be prime minister for all people. But you relinquish your faction position. So now he's been outside of the premiership for 8 months, and he's basically the head of the Seiwakai. So you could say that in terms of kingmakers, he has the pole position. Mr. Nikai, on the other hand, he's older. He's had many more successful runs at the lower house. And in that time, I mean, in Japanese culture, you know, the older you are, the more positions you hold, the more powerful you are. And the way that you exercise your power is that you pull people close to you and you put your arm around their shoulder and you say, look, I've got a favor to ask you. I've got this difficult situation and I'd like to put you in charge of it. And, you know, it's going to help you and I'll help you and we'll become good buddies as a consequence. So there are lots of opportunities to do that if you are inside the LDP, which is where he has kind of spent all of his time. So he's always in LDP headquarters, not on the national scene, but in the political scene inside. And that's what his base is. So he's very strong among other members of the parliament and also with Ms. Koike. And that's a huge boost as well. He does have a lot of pull. He can make decisions just based on his own, you know, how he feels when he wakes up in the morning. He can do that.
So would you say he has been a loyal LDP member like since the beginning, like from like, I don't know, way back when kind of thing?
Oh, sure. And I thought you were going someplace else with that question, but yes, he has. And I think you could almost say, you know, the LDP and Nikai are kind of one and the same. He feels that way.
Okay.
So who's going to be the next premier is determined by who is the leader of the LDP. That's how that works. It doesn't mean you're the most popular person inside the parliament and they vote on you. It's, you know, by definition, the LDP has the majority in the lower house and the upper house. So whoever the LDP decides is going to be their candidate for prime minister, everybody else's vote doesn't overcome the LDP's vote.
Okay, well understood. Thank you. And my second question was about
The second question is really interesting. So a lot of people have said that, you know, why Japan, the number third economy in the world, only spends less than 1% on its national defense. And there's, it's not written in the Constitution, but it's a decision that was made internally to keep the defense spending under 1%. So it's like 0.95. So they're holding close to that line. If they go over 1%, then it will signal to the Japanese population, these guys are warmongers. They're going to change our constitution to be not a peaceful constitution, but one of aggression. And that resonates hugely in Japan, but it also resonates throughout Southeast Asia, as you can imagine. Keep those Japanese not being aggressive and not being empire builders and not having an aggressive military force, because even if we allow this now, you never know. They might eat too much natto and all of a sudden they revert back to, you know, being imperialists, right? So the interesting part of that is that Mr. Abe has he's held it as a central theme of his political life is changing the Constitution, changing the Japanese Constitution to allow for a revision of Article 9, which means that Article 9 says the forces that Japan has are defense in in nature. They are not aggressive. They're not offensive. They're just to defend the country. And whatever offensive capabilities Japan has, they're only kind of under the umbrella of the United States. So if there's going to be anything offensive, it'll be the United States that does it, and Japan would be in a support role. The referendum law, I don't know if you've been following this, but in order to change the Constitution, there has to be a referendum. That means 2/3 of the upper house needs to vote, yes, we want to change the language in the Constitution from this wording to this wording. Then the lower house or the upper house, wherever the bill starts, the next house would say 2/3, we agree. And then it goes to the Japanese population. And this law that allows it to go to the Japanese population was passed on Friday. This bill has been fought over for the last 3 years, actually longer. So now that door stopper has been removed, and so the march towards revising the Japanese Constitution is now in play. And I predict that within the next 4 years, there'll be a move on that, and that the Japanese Constitution will be revised. Maybe it won't be revised on Article 9. They'll choose something a little bit more innocuous and just start the pattern. Now the Constitution has been revised. It can be revised. So, by the way, in our next diet session, we want to revise this part too. So once that gate is open, I think you'll see a lot of action on it. And plus, in the context of what's going on geopolitically, there could be an event where all of a sudden the Japanese population says, hell yes, we've got to do this. Look what happened, just 3 weeks ago. And the politicians would use that groundswell and change things to address an imminent need. So you can anticipate something like that happening too.
Interesting. And personally, would you, what's your opinion on that? Like, should they be increasing the budget? I mean, in your opinion?
In my opinion, so I've lived in Japan for a long time. I'm an American. I'm not a Japanese national. And my own personal opinion, having lived here and grown up here and done business here for so long, I think, yes, I agree with those components of the Japanese population that says we are an independent country. We should be able to protect and defend ourselves without any reliance on another country. Our Constitution should be our own. Thank you very much, the United States, for helping us with that. You revised, what we had as the Meiji Constitution. You took a lot of those pieces. We thank you for that. You changed the labor regulations. You changed, how we defend ourselves. You changed a little bit of how we govern ourselves, how, the lawyers are admitted, how a lot of these laws, it was all based on the Japanese Constitution. And the United States did have a heavy hand in that. So I think, it's been 77 years. Japan should, should be a little bit more independent. I think there's a huge voice for that. At the same time, I think the Okinawans too. The Okinawans have a right for self-determination.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thanks so much, Timothy. Thank you, Maya. I'm done.
Thank you, Kumi. Well, Tammy, good morning.
Good morning again, Maya-san. And good morning, Timothy. Thanks as always for your great talks. And I love how the seagulls are cheering on from the background.
You can hear them, huh?
Yes, we can.
They're not seagulls, they're seahawks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Raptors.
Well, great. Well, anyhow, you're getting their support, so that's good.
Thank you.
My question is very much stemmed from my personal interest, actually. Since you briefly touched on Mr. Amari while you were answering Mayuko's question. Well, we all know that he was quite a great supporter of Abe, and I think he was in Team Aso. And I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago that he lost power because of the bribery scandal.
He was also the TPP minister.
Indeed, yes, he was. But then that bribery scandal came out, and I thought that he was kind of swept under the carpet, kind of. And so, well, since I come from his local constituency, and like the local statesmen do, he sent me a personal telegram for my first marriage. So
Isn't
yeah,
that
I
nice?
just I know, well, but that's what all the statesmen do, don't they? So my question is he making a comeback as one of the kingmakers again, or do you think that the people within the party thinks that he had already served his time? Yeah, I just wanted to know what's his position right now within the party.
Question. So he cannot assume to be a kingmaker. He's not there yet. That's not him. He is a candidate to be selected by one of the kingmakers. So the kingmakers now are Mr. Abe and Mr. Nikai, and that's within the LDP. The other kingmakers within the opposition parties and who are minor wannabes, they're only kingmakers because I want to be prime minister. It's not that I want this guy to be prime minister. There's a huge distinction there. So, in fact, if you ask any member of parliament you don't even have to be worth your salt. It's part of the gig. Do you eventually want to become prime minister? Every member of parliament should say yes. I want. The reason why I'm here is I want to represent my constituency, and the best way to do that, I learned from Machiavelli, was to aspire to leadership and therefore benefiting my constituency. But that's not Amari. He's not there. Not probably. Kingmakers are born through the gristmill of being the LDP candidate for president, actually being president and prime minister. Then, in typical Japanese fashion, they actually become more powerful after they're out of office. They don't have that much scrutiny. They're not on schedule all the time. They can think more expansively. The friends that they've done favors for are, still, wanting to ingratiate themselves. And there's a whole lot more money involved after you leave public office. So that's how they become kingmakers. But I hope that answers your question.
Right. Plus, although he does come from a family of politicians, I mean, his late father was also the local statesman, but I don't think he is well bred as Kono or Abe. Do you think that's also the factor that he could never make it?
Oh, no, I don't think he could never make it. I think he's a good candidate. But I think so if you look at the current slate that Mr. Abe has his arms around, there's Mr. Shimomura, who is in the LDP now. He was Minister of Education, you might remember. And then there was a change in the cabinet, and he went into the LDP. So in order to become considered a viable candidate for prime minister, you have to have at least 2 ministerial portfolios, and you have to have one of maybe 5 positions inside the LDP. And so Shimomura has satisfied both requirements. Kono Taro hasn't satisfied those requirements. He has been minister 3 times. He's been ministerial portfolio 3 times. And if you count him being the czar of vaccine rollout, it's almost like he has 4. So he's in the public eye a lot. He's in the public eye a lot more than Shimomura. He's much more outspoken. And then you have Mr. Amari, who is, gosh, I don't know. You sound like you know an awful lot, but
not really.
As a minister, well, but you're Japanese national, right?
Mm.
As a minister, there are things that you want to say that the people who wake you up in the morning and take you to meetings, they will be mad at you. They'll be visibly mad at you for saying, venturing off script. So being a good minister means, kissing a lot of ass within the ministry, but also, doing the same thing within the LDP and getting your job done, not making any mistakes, making the prime minister look good. Make sure your secretaries aren't accepting any envelopes in the, the bottom of the bag that holds the cookies. So even as foreign minister, I think you do a good job by just following the bureaucrats and keeping your nose clean. It's not a time for you to be expansive about your personality and your flair and how it is kind of nice if you speak English. You do get a little bit more bandwidth there, but there have been lots of foreign ministers who don't speak any English. Like I am Cherry Sakurauchi. So there are lots of stories there.
Okay, interesting. Great, thank you very much for your candid answer, as always.
Thank you very much. Thanks for listening in.
Thank you. Hayato, good morning.
Oh, hi, good morning.
Morning, Hayato. How are you?
Oh, fine. How are you? So I'm a little bit late, so maybe I may have missed something here, but like I think I'm going to mention to you the other day, but the U.S. is going to be lifting a sanction against Iran. Right? So we don't have any more this attention anymore in the Middle East. So all the attention is going to be in Asia, right? So like the last time we hinted, the UK, has assembled the strongest battle troop ever in the history of the Royal Navy, and they were sent off by the Queen Elizabeth in person, and they are being joined right now by the equally the strongest naval force by the France, and they'll be sailing to Asia, probably coming next month, right? And it's for those guys, they said it's like a just tour, but it costs billions to sail per day, so they're not going to be doing this for just a tour, right? Yeah, so most likely my kind of guess, is that they are, now Chinese military strength is getting to the point where we have to tell the Chinese to back down. Otherwise, this is the only way that I can think of the U.S. and U.S., UK, the France and probably Japan has already given the Chinese, so they got to back down this military tension. Otherwise, they're gonna go come to China, and that's the only way that kind of is guessing. I would say is guessing. And it's just about the U.S. like going back to earlier speech that the U.S. is going to have territory and it's obligated to defend Japan, but U.S. is not going to be happy, or America is not going to be happy when when the U.S. troops are getting killed defending, say, the Senkaku Island, where the Japanese is sitting back and watching the U.S. troops fight against the Chinese. That's not good for the Americans. So it's kind of coming pretty much in a way that you mentioned. That Japan has to be ready to get ready to defend Japan at least, and then maybe it may have to join the rest of the country for the war against China, right? So for that, all this like that breakdown of the political move is coming timely, So if something happens very quickly and escalate, the move can really go, very quickly. The one metro into Tokyo is going to escalate the whole process within a day, as right? So for that, like I kind of think that there's a huge tension being built up, in Japan and Asia, and there's a war maybe coming, because I guess we're just getting to the stage where the U.S. and the rest of the world cannot allow Chinese to get any stronger than what it is right now. So for back to the military spending, the United States, by official numbers, they spend about 4% of the GDP. Chinese spend about 2%. Japanese spend 1%. But in the reality, the U.S. has a strong, like the CIA budget. CIA has the strongest military force in the United States. Yes, so for that, probably they're probably spending 6% of the GDP And now the Chinese say 2%, it's usually towards the 3 times to 6%. So Japan probably has to spend 5 or 6% just to compete, against all this, the neighbor. So that's my guess. I'm done talking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me give you my interpretation of what the Chinese response would be to the French and the British sending battle groups to the South China Sea. Okay, ready?
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, that's my guess. That's why I think it's coming.
Yeah. So I think the strategy of the G7 countries is it's deterrence. It's to show that the Chinese would suffer more from that kind of incursion than they would gain. But the Chinese also are known to play a long game. They're also, they're not very well known to be expansionists. This stuff that's going on right now is relatively recent in Chinese politics, that they're kind of in an expansionary mode, the road and belt strategy, and the building of these these islands as military bases. But I think that the leader has kind of determined that that's what he wants to do, that it is a destiny that Taiwan be reunited with China. And he's told all of the soldiers and all of the population, prepare for this. This is going to happen. We are going to reunite as is our destiny. So already that rhetoric is starting. And their military build-out plan to 1947, there are a couple of milestones in between there. There are opportunities for them to trigger something. Or sometimes you just, stuff happens. You get the British, you get the French, you get the Americans involved. Sometimes somebody just makes a mistake. But I also, for the Americans to be defending, quote, freedom and being the policeman of the world, to have soldiers involved in conflict and die, the American population is much more familiar with that, and it wouldn't cause a heart attack. Conversely, with the Japanese, if there was one Japanese sailor that was killed or somehow involved in some sort of a active conflict, they would have a conniption fit here. So, I think the Japanese need to be involved. They need to be engaged. A lot needs to be seen. What they do with the referendum, if they change the constitution. This is a longer plan. This is probably maybe 4 years or 5 years. But to get Japanese kids to aspire to be soldiers and to defend their country and to be more of an aggressive, that's a several generation kind of prospect. And with the declining birth population and the higher value add in technology, the kids they're not going to want to be doing push-ups and carrying rifles. There's much more of a livelihood to be had doing something else. So I predict that the Japanese will more likely than not maintain the peace constitution. It's a beautiful part of Japan, having that peace constitution. And I think, it's unique, and a lot of the Japanese want to preserve that. But who knows?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I guess who knows is the point, right?
Yeah, but let's stay tuned.
Let's do so. But I do agree with you that this is part, of the beauty, that pacifism is actually a real thing here, and it lies with the population, not with the politicians, which is great. Well, Tomomi, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for taking me and answering to my childish question every time. Thank you. And this is something me and my coworker talking and questioning about for 2 years. It's about dual nationality and the foreign nationals voting right. You know, I'm in Osaka working for the college, and most of my coworkers are foreign nationals. And we first started talking about foreign nationals voting right when Osaka, the metropolis plan, the referendum came in 2020. My friend who had lived here more than 10 years didn't have the right to vote. And yeah, and some Japanese say like foreign nationals should obtain Japanese nationality if they want to vote. But you know, Japan doesn't allow the dual nationality, dual citizenship. So like, and addition to that, the COVID pandemic prevention measures, those re-entry bans kind of sound almost discriminative. Many foreign nationals are kind of frustrated ever before because they can't see their family close ones because the entering ban stuff. So do you think Japanese government will kind of speed up doing something for like making a change for the dual nationality and voting right stuff? What do you think?
That's a great question, Maya. I think we should limit the number of people or the kind of people who join this group to just men. The women, they just talk too much. They just take up so much time. So I think we should.
Oh, poor you. But okay, please bear with us.
That is my way of responding to you. If that attitude towards women, right? It is current. It is not. It is a viable sentiment. If that, you know, and there's a lot of progress being made in that area, but that's with women who are Japanese. You multiply that times maybe 100 or 200, and you have the sentiment that is directed towards foreigners in general. So dealing with the foreigners in this country, it's, I mean, just on the basis of just about anything, it's very xenophobic. And the admittance and the acceptability of foreigners in Japan, it's tolerated. But you have so many stories that reveal the I don't know if it's the true feelings, but you know, what's going on with the immigration facilities, what's going on with spousal abduction, which is another horrible thing that happens here pretty frequently. Getting to voting rights for foreigners, that is so far down the list. I think that the argument that if you want to vote, we like you paying your taxes, but you know, you use the infrastructure too, so that's that. But if you do want to vote, then you should become a Japanese national. I think that makes a terrific sense. So I think the argument of having foreigners vote in these elections because it's fair and it's just, I think in this country, in this culture, it's a real stretch. I don't know if, I mean, maybe depending on the municipality, it might come through, but the foreigners, I mean, all foreigners in Japan make up less than 1% of the total population. So on the one hand, you could say it doesn't make that much difference. They're not going to sway a vote in any event. But on the other hand, you know, of that 1%, you know, very, very few of them are what most people consider actively engaged foreigners, because most of them are they're Chinese, Koreans, Vietnamese, not the kind that when you think of foreigners, the expatriate foreigners who bring value and bring money and bring technology, that number is very, very small. And if you want those kind of people to vote, maybe that would be one thing. But when you include foreigners, it's the whole slew. So I don't know if that initiative would gain much traction. I apologize if I offended anybody.
Thank you. Tomomi?
Yeah, thank you. So there is kind of no hope right now, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, even kids born of international parents, so mom is Japanese or dad is Japanese and the other one is another nationality. Even those kids have a bit of a hard time because they're supposed to choose. There's no sanctions. There's no penalty. You can still travel on 2 passports. It's like one of those. It's funny because Japan is really a stickler for the rules, but on that particular issue, they're really relaxed on it. So I can see where people are somewhat confused by it, or maybe they want to expand the ability of foreigners to participate. And I think it's with the population declining as it is, productivity requires people. And if you're not going to have a wider immigration policy, if you're not going to allow those people that do immigrate and become citizens, or maybe not become citizens, but just lead their lives here to participate in the political process, it becomes less of an attractive place to make it your career. I hope that's somewhat responsive to Momo.
Yeah, thank you so much. And your voice sounded really good today.
Well, I listened to you last week, and so I tried to have 2 cups of coffee. I was not successful. I had 1 cup of coffee, but I made sure that my voice was better. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. If you need, I can send you honey or something. Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, and Hidetada, good morning. Are you there?
Good morning.
Yes.
Good morning. I just confused that in United States, no one could vote unless you are U.S. citizens.
That's right.
So
Unless-
why is that even the question in Japan? Unless you want to become a Japanese citizen, and why are you allowing
That's right.
foreign citizens to participate in the democratic process?
That's true.
I think a lot of people would agree with you. The sticking point there is that they don't allow for dual nationality, and so I've got to surrender.
I was born in Japan, and I became a U.S. citizen. Then my Japanese citizenship is automatically disappear or legally disappear. Although someone say that I can still carry a Japanese passport, but which is illegal.
That's right.
So many people believe that they maintain dual citizenship, but legally it's not. Many Europeans and many Americans believe that they carry different passport, but those are not legally valid. So we have to separate the discussion between what you feel right and what is legally plausible.
Yep, I completely agree with you. If you're going to participate in the political process, if you're going to vote, if you're going to run for office, you need to be a citizen of that country. I think to me, that sounds reasonable. And if it was put to a vote, I think that would be the predominant way people would think about it.
Indeed. Okay. All right.
But anyway, I always like the conversation in this room, so thank you for you doing this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your input.
Thank you for coming. And today we've got Stephen. Good morning, Stephen. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, good morning. This is Zach House. I was interested in listening to Timothy's discussion and Maya's moderation. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes?
Yes, no birds in the background.
Great. So, yeah, just a couple comments on the voting. I think it's, I do think there's political reasons behind Japan's strategy or approach to not allowing foreigners to vote. And it's just, frankly, there's foreigners that, for example, the Zainichi Koreans and many Chinese that have interest in their home countries. And I think that the Japanese government very understands these issues, and that if they include these individuals as voters, it could substantially change the political landscape in Japan. And I think that this is one of the very practical reasons why we're not going to see any additional leeway for foreigners to be able to participate in the political system. And I think it, Hidetada mentions, about the United States as an example for voting. I think, you can also turn to Europe, and Europe has many mechanisms to allow people from other nationalities to vote in France or Germany or Italy and Spain. So there are models out there to allow for non-nationals to participate in the political system. But what it does require is a certain amount of time in that country. So somebody like myself who's been here for 17 years, in the European case, I'd be allowed to vote because I pay taxes and I'm vested in the system. So there's lots of different dynamics to this discussion, but I'd be willing to interested in hear what Timothy and Maya has to say about this.
Okay, let me go first. First of all, thank you very much for voicing your opinion about the Zainichi, let's say, residents. The North Korean and also Korean and Chinese residents here in Japan, because it's a real issue. And as you said, the Japanese government obviously is very aware that it is going to change the political landscape and the dynamics here if those residents are allowed to vote. But of course, the question is how they get assimilated, because I think that the cultural assimilation here in Japan, the cultural assimilation of those citizens has not taken place yet. So, as you said, they are still very much interested in what is going on back home. So yeah, that's really a difficult question, and I think that because of those people, you cannot just say, if you get in the shoes of the Japanese government, if you say, okay, we can allow people who have lived in Japan and pay taxes here, who have lived, let's say, for 10 years to vote, but we don't want the North Koreans and Chinese and the South Koreans to vote, so they're going to be accused of discrimination. And so this is one of the door stoppers, let's say, for allowing all the foreigners, to assimilate here and to become, to actually be allowed to participate in the political decision-making process. As voters, anyway. So yes, that's the first thing. And sorry, I just lost the second one. The second point now. Could you please help me?
Saying in the EU.
Oh, yes.
So, for example, if somebody from Norway decides to work in France, they, after a certain period of time, they're actually allowed to vote at the local elections and participate in local politics. So I think there's a lot of different ways Japan could rethink this. That doesn't necessarily mean voting at the national level, but of course participating in the electoral process at the local level.
Yes, absolutely. Still, I think that the point which you made about the residents here, from the neighbor countries. Well, let's face it, and we all know that Japan is a very risk-averse culture, and they basically think in the long term when it comes to risk. So maybe this is another door stopper, to them. Even allowing people to vote at municipal level. So it's probably because from there you elect people, you elect that's local level politicians, and from there those politicians they actually have that decision-making power which can affect national politics in the long term at the end. So it's really a complicated subject. I don't know, but I'm not a professional, let's say, political analyst. So I think that Timothy has a better point of view, on this.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have much to add on that. The only word I would key off of is assimilation. Assimilation into this country and this culture and the language. I think that's really the key point. And until that can be done, and a lot of people have tried, and it's a hard process. So I think the default mode is status quo. But great observation. Thank you.
But if you compare recent happening in Israel, that Netanyahu is gone and that country is moving towards something different direction than they before. It may be a century, but Japan may need to move on to that directions. The predominant ethnic and cultural domination would be surpassed by a newcomer and new culture, and Japanese are moving into the different directions.
That's an interesting point, isn't it? And well, it depends, because the Japanese people.
So Japan thought there was a monoculture and a mono, but it's not.
It's not, no. So that's a good point, because I think that notion that Japan is monocultural and monoethnic has been imposed, on the nation, let's say, after the Second World War. But basically, there are so many different people, here in Japan, and it's not, well, you've got the indigenous people as well. And so there have been a lot of influences, cultural influences here in Japan, so that it's very difficult to say that Japan is monocultural. And of course, it's monolingual at the moment still. But I mean, people are just, they are apprehensive when they hear about, other cultural, influences anyway. But that's not the case. And probably, we need to, or not we, the foreigners, for us, it will be a kind of difficult to change the narrative. But, the more academics talk about the diversity here, which has existed for a long time anyway, the more or the less scary these cultural influences will look to the native people here, I believe. Because yes, Japan has been a closed country, but diversity has been here for a long time anyway. Sorry,
I don't have any further thing to add to this.
Maya, could I ask another question, if that's okay?
Oh, please do. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I live in Hong Kong, and I'm just curious how the majority of politicians, or more importantly, the people who are in power, see what's going on in Hong Kong. Is there any sense of urgency among them? Because I've noticed that particularly the Japanese media seems to be more interested in Agnes Cho, calling her the goddess of democracy, rather than the issue itself. And she's actually only one of the activists. In fact, there are other politicians or activists like Joshua Wan or Nathan Law. And Timothy, I remember you had mentioned that after Hong Kong, it's Taiwan, and after Taiwan, then it's perhaps Okinawa. So do you think that Japan should sort of wake up and take a closer look at what's going on in Hong Kong?
I don't think it's being ignored. I think it's being closely followed, and the important part here is having the right kind of spokesman. So there's no official representation of the way Hong Kong, the people in Hong Kong feel, because it's somewhat been usurped, and those potential leaders of the voice for democracy and autonomy, they're kind of dispersed. They're diverse. So they find a young girl who's attractive and speaks eloquently, and she also speaks Japanese, which is a huge factor. And also there's just the injustice of it all. But the fact of the matter is that the British held Hong Kong, and under the terms it would be reverted. So I think the Chinese are just making good on that promise. It's unfortunate that the Chinese are moving that way, but I think that has been in the game plan all along. So for many people, they see it as it's just an inevitable thing. How can you? And the encroachment it's like boiling a frog. It's just little by little, not enough to make people really foreign observers really mad. Of course, it makes the people who live there and who are undergoing the changes
suspicious and angry and vote with their feet. You know, they move someplace else. They take their money and they go to, you know, Taiwan or Canada or Japan. But it is, you know, they are being forced out of their own country. Probably if there's no huge, you know, even in spite of the riots, it makes the news, but nobody does anything about it.
Okay, so you feel there is a sort of a fair reporting or spotlight on the Hong Kong issue, and that people in Nagatacho recognize it as
I think it's being followed.
Okay.
I think it's being followed very carefully.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Actually, Tim, can I jump in here?
Sure.
Yeah. So I work on these kinds of issues through my work at the university and think tanks, but quite frankly, you know, many diplomats have communicated to me privately that they look at what's happened in Hong Kong as a lesson to be much more patient in how they engage with China, but much more cautious with how they think about China. And it's been an eye-opener in terms of the determination about Beijing's intentions for the broader China.
Getting what they want.
Getting what they want, exactly. And really, it's sad for the Hong Kong people. And they have now lost their right to speak out, and they don't know what they can say publicly and even privately. And when you have meetings with Hong Kong people, they tend to avoid topics related to the central government and politics. So the people in Nagatacho are very, they understand this, and it's been a lesson. And I think that's partly the reason why we see Taiwan come up in many discussions and public statements, whether it's the US-Japan joint statement by Prime Minister Suga and President Biden. At the G7 summit, we're going to see probably a statement on Taiwan. We have the Quad meeting that's going to happen at the side of the G7. We're probably going to have a statement on Taiwan. And this is all coordinated, and I think it's based on what they've seen in Hong Kong and the dramatic change in Hong Kong's one country, two system model.
That's a great observation. So one could say, hey, you know, as a sovereign country, they should be able to be, but they're not a sovereign country. Hong Kong is not a sovereign country. And similarly, you could say the same thing about Taiwan. As a sovereign country, it should be, well, there's a little bit of dispute about that. So you might recall that the United States has refrained from calling Taiwan a country. They had a famous movie actor, one of the muscle guys on Driving Fast Cars and Chasing Loose Women, was in Hong Kong promoting his new movie. He was in Taiwan,
yeah,
and he mentioned just as a slip of the tongue, you know, the country of, and he had to retract that. But you might notice also that the Japanese and the Americans now have referred recently to Taiwan as a country. This drives the Chinese crazy. But yes, if it is, you know, the United States doesn't even have an embassy there, right? They have an embassy in all of the countries of the world. They don't have an embassy in Taiwan. They have it's a trade promotion office. The individual who leads that is not ambassadorial rank. He is basically an administrator. So I think you'll see this change, because you're right. What happens in Hong Kong is just a blueprint for what's going to happen in Taiwan. And if the other nations acknowledge Taiwan as an independent, self-administered country, things will change dramatically, and it'll probably accelerate things.
Yeah, I think the general trend, Tim, and everybody on the call, is that the one country, two systems model of, you know, the basis for relations with China is gradually becoming more and more dilute. And I think because the United States has been so forward on this, that other countries are feeling more comfortable with loosening that one country, two systems model and finding creative ways to step around it. And you know, setting up the United States under the former administration changed the law so that U.S. ministries and U.S. Departments could formally meet with Taiwanese counterparts.
That's right.
And that's a big deal. That's a big deal. And I think this may not have happened if the national security law wasn't adopted in Hong Kong.
You're right. There was a much fanfare about Joe Young having dinner with the representative of Taiwan in Japan. It was the first time for them to meet. It might be just even a trial balloon, but they did publish in the newspaper. Joe Young went public and published, his photos with the representative at the dinner. So I think you're seeing a change going on here. Once again, it could be a trial balloon. If you guys continue this encroachment in the South China Seas, then this is what we're going to do, and we're going to make sure that Taiwan is recognized as a country, and you're going to have a harder time. And if you do begin to move against them aggressively, NATO will become involved in that sort of thing. Yeah, very astute. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Thank you. So I have a question to you, Timothy, and it goes back to the first topic you talked about today. Oh, sorry, I know I talk too much, but please bear with me. Right. Okay, so you talked about COVID-19 and the vaccines, and that PM Suga, he actually, came out and said that, that the population would be vaccinated until the end of November. And at the same time, there are some talks about, him pushing the elections until the last possible day, which is November 28th.
Right.
So do you think that there is, some, let's say, he has some back thoughts, or if I can call them that, like he's hoping, to gain more votes by, pushing the election back, and then, having the population inoculated, and then, so do you think that probably this will help him with the election, become a prime minister again, or not?
So they've already published the schedule of what's going to happen at the end of his term, and when the House will be closed down, and when he will speak to the nation. Mm-hmm. That's already on schedule.
Okay.
And it will probably be followed. There are things that could happen that accelerate that process, but the schedule as it is now, and it was published 2 weeks ago, is that towards the end of September, the prime minister will pass a supplementary budget. Everybody will be happy about that. He will then give a State of the Union address. Then he will close down the House. There will be an election of the lower house. And when the results come in, then he'll say, as your prime minister, my term has come. I would like to continue representing you. What do you guys say? That's the general pattern that's coming out. The likelihood of it following that is, as of today, the most likely scenario. The things that are in between that are of great interest are who's going to challenge him? Is he going to put himself up for election, which means that other people would be reluctant to? So there are people that are in the cabinet that Mr. Abe likes a lot that could not challenge Mr. Suga. Diplomatically, it's just unpolitic. You're in the cabinet and you're going to challenge the prime minister. It doesn't work like that. So it would either mean that he has to resign, or that several members of the cabinet would resign in anticipation of that candidacy coming open to them. So keep your eye on that.
Thank you.
With regard to Mr. Suga's popularity, it is very low now. The numbers won't be released for another week on what his current popularity is. But the last time it was taken, it was, I believe, 35%. And there has been nothing coming up that has kind of boosted his ratings. The SDF coming in and setting up the supplementary vaccine sites, that's good. That kind of falls on Kono, but you can't do that without Mr. Suga's support. He made a promise. I promised that the 65-year-old geezers they'll be done by the end of July, and then everybody else by the end of November, because I'm a leader and because I'm really working hard for you. Typically when leaders are in a little bit of trouble, they go overseas to burnish their image. He's now at G7, maybe with Mr. Biden's arm on his shoulder or something like that. This is a hopeful boost to his popularity too, but it doesn't look so great for him right now. Any good news would be great news, because otherwise, if it just continues like this, people are just going to shrug their shoulders. I don't know. He didn't really do anything, and maybe it's COVID, but he's just got those beady eyes. I don't know. I'd rather have somebody young, right? So it's a lot is left to be seen.
Great, thank you. Well, Ravi, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Maya. Good morning, Timothy. I mean, thank you very much for allowing me to come up on the forum, and it has been such a insightful listening sessions. I mean, every weekend, and I should apologize. Like I'm one of those culprits who actually joined around half an hour late from this beginning of the session. Given I joined from Singapore, so I mean it tends to be like I usually get up late. So my apologies.
That's okay. We're keeping track of this, like the Olympic Committee is going to be keeping track via GPS of all of these snarly foreigners that come into this country. We're following you too, so please sign on at the appropriate time next week.
Cool, thank you. So my question was with regards to the recent judgment by South Korean court with the wartime labor issues, right? I mean, which was being judged in the favor of Japanese companies, both Nippon Steel and Mitsubishi, and then another case on the comfort women issues. So, I mean, do you think, I mean, there is some thawing in the Korean and Japanese relationships in terms when it comes to, because, I mean, the judgment by the initial court was more against the Japanese companies, but I mean, suddenly we see a couple of cases being favored. Yeah. So, do we see that? I mean, and something more positive coming out from these rulings in favor of the companies and for a better relationship between these two countries?
That's a great observation. And let's say geopolitically, this is all a classroom, and all of the countries are students in the classroom. And one of the teacher says, to run this class effectively, you two kids sitting in the back, you guys I'm going to move you over here and you're going to sit over here. Now kiss and make up, and I don't want you to fight anymore. And you over here with the big nose, sit down and shut up, right? If that was possible, and you put that into the geopolitical context that we're in now, something big is building with China and Taiwan. And the best way to address that is by a unified action against that kind of threat. And that involves mainly the Japanese, certainly, but it involves the Koreans. It involves a lot of different people. The French are coming over. They've got the big battleship, and the British are coming over with a big battleship and new technology, and they're going to sail through the waters in a show of force. The Japanese haven't been all that great in repairing the huge emotional sentiment of the Southeast Asian neighbors. So even if Japan went a little bit more materialistic and militaristic and started developing their forward capabilities, a lot of people are not going to like that. And even when they sail into port with the old Hinomaru, the flag that was used extensively by the Navy, which is still an appropriate flag for Japan, it just reminds people of too many bad things. And the Japanese, just over 70 years, it just hasn't really quite come together as a lot of people would have liked. There's a lot of
I don't think Timothy is answering the question, because lower court is disagreeing in the Superior Court decision is unlikely to happen in the United States. That happened in Korea? That was the question. So implication of that is unknown because we can't see how South Korea is going to respond to that kind of reaction, because superior highest court said one thing, but the lower court said you're wrong. That is not going to happen in the United States or in Japan. Timothy, you're not answering the question.
Yeah, I was kind of dancing around it. What I'm trying to say is that this is a movement, I think forward movement, in that eventually the Japanese and the South Koreans will come to terms with that part of the relationship, that part of the history between them.
It is the issue of South Korea, not in Japan. They need to deal with it, because they have disagreement within the court system in South Korea. They need to reconcile that. That's not the problem of anybody else, but within South Korea, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But there are investments that the Japanese make in South Korea. There have been threats on the investments that are in Korea. If you don't do things, you need to pay reparations. All of these war slaves that you had, the Inafu, you need to deal with that issue. You need to deal with all of these other issues that are lingering over. Addressing those and kind of putting those to rest. I mean, it's been taking generations, and finally there is a little bit of movement. There's the art display that's still, causing great consternation. Whenever it comes up, it's just one of those issues that just remind people of the animosity that exists between Korea and Japan, and somehow that needs to be settled. I don't know if it's the school.
No, I agree and I understand all that, but question was this particular court decision. So the court decision was in conflict within the South Korea. There's nothing to do with anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess that's the point, and thank you very much for voicing it anyway. So, okay, Ravi, do you have any other questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you, Timothy. Thank you, Ito-san, for your inputs as well. That's very valuable. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And we've got Fumi. Good morning, Fumi.
Hey, good morning, Timothy and Maya. I've got a question. So Timothy-san said China is very good at sort of planning something for long term. So first one is maybe it's happening already, but Hong Kong is kind of is being controlled, and also Taiwan will be part of China maybe in next 10 years or 20 years, whatever. I can see Senkaku will be is the next target, and I've got a simple question. So recently, Japanese lands, especially Okinawa and Tokyo, have been bought by Chinese people, and that could be a kind of risk for Japanese for long term. What do you think about that? Should we, prohibit them buying our lands? Especially, if we're looking at this, is their plan for the long term? Yeah.
So there has been. It's an interesting point that you bring up. So initially, what was happening was the Chinese were purchasing fresh water.
Yeah.
And the effluent that was rushing off of Japanese rivers and streams. The Chinese really need more fresh water, and they've been purchasing that. They've moved upstream a little bit. Pardon the pun. They've moved upstream in terms of purchasing land. So it's not just I don't even know if it's the Chinese government. It's Chinese citizens who have a lot of money who are coming in and purchasing land. A lot of it in Okinawa. There's a great movement there. But I think maybe the Chinese government works through different ways than the Japanese government or the U.S. government would work. If it's the Japanese or the U.S. government's hand, it's evident. Whereas with the Chinese, people act on behalf of the Chinese government. So sometimes the sourcing and the intentions are a little bit hidden. So the Diet passed a law. They've continually passed laws about foreign ownership of certain industries that are considered to be strategically important. So with chips and condensers, that's one of the issues that Mr. Suga's son ran into with the amount of foreign involvement in his company, Tohoku Shinsha. But they passed just another law maybe 2 weeks ago, where we have identified, the Japanese government has identified certain pieces of land that are sensitive because they're near a base or they're near something else, and so foreigners cannot purchase that. That's pretty significant, and it's in line with your observation.
Okay. Can Japanese government sort of specify like a nationality in terms when they create this kind of law? Like for example, Chinese cannot buy, or Russian cannot buy this, but the US people can buy, or other New Zealand people can buy it, whatever. Can they specify? Like, no, right? So that means
foreigners.
So once we prohibit this outside people, non-Japanese buying lands of Japan, that means like we can't sort of open the country to the immigrants and stuff. So that's it's a bit difficult, isn't it? Like a difficult situation, because I'm for the idea of the opening Japan to immigrants. But if we say you cannot buy lands, if you come to Japan, that's
no.
terrible.
It's different between ownership and sovereignty. Even though foreigner can own Japanese land, but still it's a Japanese sovereignty, and the Japanese law apply to govern that land, even though owned by the foreign citizens. So this is difference between shuken to ownership. So sovereignty and rule of law is different thing.
Okay.
And also, there's plenty of land that foreigners can buy. Just look at Niseko. Lots of land and great economic development there. So it's just special pieces of land that the Japanese government has identified as being sensitive, and those are off limits.
Yeah. Okay. There are only two prefectures which have the values of the land has been increased, which is Tokyo and Okinawa, because of the Chinese money. So these are the sort of the two main main prefectures that we need to protect from China, I guess. So maybe we would better say, hey, you can't buy, like Okinawa lands in Tokyo as well, but others we can, or something like that.
Well, I think you're talking about two different things. So the amount of money that's fleeing Hong Kong, maybe not even fleeing China, but part of it is, I have so much money in China. What am I going to do with it? I can buy stuff in China, but then I'm just like every other Chinese. I want something else. I want something different. And a lot of that money that it's seeking, a good home, it's seeking a good investment, it's seeking a place to maybe escape to. I don't know. But the Chinese are going big time into Okinawa, but they're going big time into a lot of places too. It's just, it's more obvious to the Okinawan people in the influx of Chinese money. But a lot of that is from Taiwan too, and Hong Kong.
Okay. All right. I'll keep on with it. Thank you.
The more interesting part of that is we didn't talk about it. You didn't ask much about it, but it's the purchasing of rivers and streams and the amount of water that's coming off of that. That's really an interesting aspect of the water comes off of Japan very rapidly. The rivers are relatively slow, and the Japanese don't utilize. I mean, there's plenty of fresh water here, so as an export, it's probably not a bad idea. But the volume of Chinese purchasing it is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And good morning. We've got Taka.
Hi.
Thank you for
Hi,
coming
Maya.
up. Hi.
Thank you for inviting me on the platform.
Good morning.
Good morning. You're welcome. So, what's your question today?
Well, no, regarding the land ownership, you can see example in Thailand. In Thailand, they always welcome foreigners, but foreigners are not allowed to purchase a property on land. So that could be a helpful example for this issue.
Yes, it could be, but there are obviously, quite a lot of different opinions on this. So, and yes, we'll see. But I guess that it's more or less a point, of sensitive land, land which is strategically important to the Japanese government and the Japanese, self-defense and the military.
Water
Anyway,
resource.
yes, resources, natural resources as well. Otherwise, as Timothy said, in Niseko, you've got, a very good, sizable population of Australians who have purchased land there. And since it is not strategically important, so obviously, there have been no problems with that.
I think I've written a book about Niseko before.
Right, yeah.
So I do know the Aussie have made a huge contribution to the land with no strategical importance.
Well, they have, obviously. So, yes, we've got that example at the moment. And it only makes sense, that the Japanese government actually passed the law to protect strategically important pieces of land here in Japan. So, yes, but otherwise, obviously, as a strategically important land, we can also, we consider the land which contains natural resources as well. So, yeah. I mean, I doubt that people would actually be against anything like that. The point is, other land which is open for development, because obviously there is a lot of, a lot of it here in Japan which can actually benefit from development. And it's not only the land; the local communities can benefit from it too. So that's but that's obviously, a question of. Other discussion, however. So, yes, thank you very much for giving that example of, Taiwan and so on.
Thailand.
Oh, sorry, Thailand. Sorry, Thailand.
We have the chapter in Bangkok.
Right. Yes. Thank you.
They also have a different issue though.
Yeah, every country comes with its own pack of issues, right? So, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So,
one of the issues, if you don't mind me just tossing this in there.
Yes, please go ahead.
A great observation. Thank you for your question. So one of the issues maybe we could talk about at some other clubhouse room is the amount of homes that are abandoned or just laying fallow, and that is people could purchase that land and fix up the house and live there. It's a great opportunity. It's just that, and I think a lot of foreigners would do that. It's just that the land and the homes, they're mired in inheritance issues, in the issues with registration, stuff like that. So these pieces of property just stay and lay fallow. I wish there was some way that we could address this issue, because it's a crying need throughout Japan, but maybe time for another session. But foreigners.
Well, it's a personal issue for me too.
I said.
It is personal because I'm also an Airbnb host.
Well, we hope that that issue, which I mean, it's not only you, but other people's have, it will be resolved. So yes, Timothy, thank you very much for that, for the the idea. So we can do that in another room, indeed, talking about the homes and so on. Thank you. Yes. Well, and if you don't mind me, I would like to invite Tomomi. Good morning.
Sure.
Yes, to talk.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you, Maya. Hi, everyone. I'm connecting from Washington, D.C. This is my first time joining this room, so sorry, I'm not still trying to familiarize myself, so I really don't know the structure or the rules here, but I suppose that we pose questions to Tim and he would be answering. But anyway, I found it a bit funny because I'm Japanese and I should be the one who would be, knowledgeable about my own country. But I admit that it's been like more than 20 years since I left the country, so I'm not really up to date on many issues, including the politics. So I really don't know what's been already discussed or, what would be today's topic. But if I may ask some questions regarding the Japanese government latest policies around climate change and environmental protection. I think I've seen some news a few months ago that the Ministry of Environmental Protection, I don't know how to say that actually, but the Minister Koizumi issued a new regulation that to ban some plastic spoons or plastic bags. I don't really remember precisely, but some actions being taken, but it stirred some discussion that is it enough or it's just a gesture, or so I got curious that what's really happening to actually promote the slowing down of the climate change or to promote the environmental protection. Any notable regulations or latest policies that you think is kind of ahead of the curve other than other countries? Something very notable.
I can't say that there's a notable policy change with regard to treatment of plastics, but if you've been in Tokyo recently, you will notice that more and more the straws that really don't work are becoming popular in the restaurants. So you're getting a lot of that. I don't know if that's by regulation. That's just, I think, mostly by branding. But the United States, Mr. Suga visited with Biden 3 weeks ago, and climate change was a big part of their issue. So when Mr. Suga came back, now climate change and the environment is a big part of his issue. So there's a lot of horse trading, there's a lot of tit for tat that goes on there. And he came back and they did have a discussion with Koizumi, and also Koizumi and Konotaro in talking about the environment and how we're going to deal with that, and use of paper and going digital and wind turbines and geothermal, that sort of thing. So there is tremendous movement that's going on there, but I can't point to any policy change that's come out. Once again, it's a little bit too soon to see the effects of that. He just came back 3 weeks ago. There are already things that are going on in the diet that are of pretty critical importance.
That sounds like it's getting attention quite all of a sudden, just because President Biden pushed Japan to do something. That's a pity.
Well, it kind of is, yes. It kind of is. And Mr. Biden has dedicated a tremendous amount of money so that the world doesn't drown by swelling oceans. But, the United States and Japan are bound at the hip. And if it's important to the United States, it's therefore going to be important to Japan, because it'll be important to Japan because Japan has important things that you would like the United States to acknowledge and accommodate. And so there's that horse trading that's going on. I don't know what that tit for tat would be. More likely it's better trade negotiation positions, or military coverage, or the fact that, I want to be prime minister and I need you to be friendly with me, obviously, so that my star rises, Mr. Biden, that sort of thing.
Well, I guess it's my observation is that there is a gap So the way the US sees Japan and the other way around, I think it's like almost like a one-way street. Like Japan really loves the US, and then the Japanese media during the Prime Minister Suga's visit to the US was like, it was all over and it was everywhere. But in the US, I really didn't see much reporting about the Japanese Prime Minister's visit. It was like really like momentarily, like a few seconds on the news, but it was not really treated as significant.
Funny thing about that. So what's your reaction? What do you think is going on there then?
I thought it's sad, and I clearly see that, you know, in the American foreign policies is all about Russia and China. I haven't heard or seen any discussion over Japan. I mean, it's clear that we are like good allies and partners, so there's no doubt about it. And then I think that the US sees Japan as an important partner, but still the amount of the energy that the State Department or all these politicians are spending is like resources and all these things, not so much on Japan. I think we are just too safe and we are not considered something that would require special attention from the US. So it's a bit, so I saw, you know, all these gaps, how it's been reported, how the media treats all these things. I felt a bit sad because my country is getting overshadowed by all others, you know, all these emerging economies and superpowers, and so that's my feeling, but I'm not sure how people in Japan are seeing those things. The gap is widening day by day, and we are sort of getting behind in so many ways from other Asian countries and the other emerging economies. So,
well, let's see if that tone changes a little bit. You know, we've got a friend of Joe Biden who has been nominated as ambassador to Japan, and that hearing to accept him or accept that nomination is coming up, and probably by the beginning of fall, he will, I mean, assuming he passes the nominations process, which I believe he will, maybe then, you know, he has something to do. He's on a mission too. And so you might see a more robust portrayal of the U.S.-Japan relationship under a new ambassador. But who knows? But a lot of people, a lot of the Japan hands like yourself, they sense that, and they want more of a attentive role from the United States in terms of trade and defense and just so many of the things. It's a rich relationship. They just want to see more of it coming out. But a lot of people are feeling the same way that you feel.
What if we have Prime Minister like Netanyahu who fluent in English, or Macron who is fluent in English, but what is the position of Japan that they will like to push in a global agenda? I don't see that, unfortunately.
Yeah. So there are more negatives than positives. What are you going to do about technology, or about flying cars, or about supercomputers? There's a little bit about that, but the more prominent stuff is the negative things. You know, are you going to really dump that water into the Fukushima Bay? You know, are foreigners going to still continue to die in detention when they have just been arrested for, you know, overstaying their visa? A lot of things that are just kind of, they have negative connotations. The things that have positive connotations, boy, there just can't be enough of them, but there aren't that many. And there's great hope and anticipation that the Japanese juggernaut, the Keidanren, and the economy here will come up with something that's marvelous.
Indeed. I can see Hayato is probably willing to chime in. Hayato?
Oh, yes. Hi. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes. Go
Okay.
ahead.
No, I've been stuck on this, as you can imagine, this kind of thing for a very, very long time. And, one is Japanese government or Japanese all feel that, the Japan doesn't have to lobby at all, right? Yeah, so the, lobbying budget in the United States is almost zero, right? Yeah, so like, and everybody else is working very hard or, try to push, their agenda within the United States because the United States is a, democratic, country, right? Yeah, so that's why, there are a lot of money behind, to try to push the budget, right? But Japan has no budget at all, right? Yeah, so now, what happens, in the world democracy, that's one, right? Yeah, and also like, in the reality, right? No matter what the Japan says, it doesn't matter, right? Because the U.S. has military power to occupy Japan right now, right? Yeah, so for that, it's like a one-way street. What the U.S. wants the Japan to do, pretty much, Yeah, it's no different than the Hong Kongese try to speak to the the Chinese government, in the reality. So that's my kind of view, right? Yeah, but like the first step is I try to do, but those guys don't do it, right? Which is the Japanese government should they should come up with a budget and start lobbying like the rest of the world. Otherwise, they get ignored, right? Like right now, and they'll never change.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Great
And also, I
observation.
even went to the Prime Minister's office 3 years ago, and tried to set them promotion like PR budget like other governments to try to do that in the public opinion in the United States. Those guys do anything, no budget, and those guys say so well, like they will just press release,
Sorry, what do you mean by the budget? What specifically
Oh,
you
okay,
mean
so
by the
here, right,
budget?
for example, right, in the U.S. has all this U.S. Democratic government, like Japan, right? So the government, has all the government decision makers in the different part of the government, right? So that they're like a lobbyist who work hard to try to influence those, decisions on the policy making, and those guys are retained, to do the work. Like other governments do, but Japan doesn't because Japan assumes that the United States is going to do this for free, So that's why like
You
nothing will
mean
happen.
the military defense? What I just
Everything,
didn't get it.
everything.
But the US doesn't dictate how the Japanese government allocates or execute our own national budget. What do you mean?
On the front,
I think it's a
it
bit of
looks that way.
stretch.
The way in the reality, the United States is going to influence in many ways that are not visible, right? Right, because the United States is a country of military, supremacy, and also the intelligence leader, as you know. So there are a lot of things that are taking place right now in Japan that's going to be influenced over the decision inside out.
Can I add
Right,
something?
Oh, go
I
ahead.
think we are speculating too much.
It's not.
To
It
say
is not.
that
I'm doing
the
it for
US
business,
has
living,
such
so.
an explicit and direct influence on the allocation and decision making over the Japanese domestic
I'm not speculating. I do this for living. Right. And I wish Japan, I would like to do lobbying for Japan, but they don't have budget.
Yeah, I think the Japanese lobby through METI, they lobby through Keidanren, they lobby through JETRO, but I think most Japanese companies, number one, they're very unskillful at it, and number two, even when they try it, they don't do a very good job. There've been several PR failures in trying to promote Japan, and they spend lots of money for Dentsu or whoever else to promote the image or to have the prime minister pop out of the Olympic opening ceremony or stuff like that to promote the image and the values of Japan and that sort of thing. But even the United States, I don't think they have similarly an organized budget. They don't lobby so much as I think you're interpreting it
through the State Department or through the Commerce Department. They do it through companies, and a lot of the large companies are very influential in Japanese business economy, but not in politics. But they're very influential here. But joining Keidanren is a difficult issue, or even having a leadership.
Well, we lost Timothy once again, obviously. Yes, he's gone because he's on a boat. The boat is still there, I believe.
Oh,
Yes.
nice life.
Yes, he will be back, I believe. But, well, thank you very much for that. And I do agree with you that, well, probably it's a matter of budget, and it's also a matter of, lack of experience and know-how of how to lobby or how to actually do public relations, not only within Japan, but out of Japan as well. Because we have seen even during this pandemic that there has been very, very bad, it's not miscommunication, but also lack of communication on the side of the government, how things are done and so on. So it's also a matter of transparency. And when there is a little, actually the lack of communication leads to lack of transparency, and then we witness how, the trust is actually lost. So, well, let's see how things go. And Timothy, welcome back. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you. So
You're
I said all
welcome.
these great things, these great pearls of wisdom. It was so brilliant, but you guys didn't hear, so I'm just not going to go over it again. Anyway, I think you probably covered all the bases, Maya.
Well, I just tried to cover for you anyway, but thank you very much for the vote of confidence.
Thank you.
And
Just to tie it up, Hayato, I wish Japan was better at promoting Japan. It's not just Hello Kitty. It's just not Cool Japan. It's not just ramen, the thousands of kinds of ramen. It's richer, it's deeper, it's more textured. But I haven't been impressed, and Dentsu doesn't do that good a job. And having the Prime Minister pop out of the tube at the opening ceremony, it's okay. I just Japan is such a marvelous country. I wish they were doing it much better on the PR front, not just the lobbying front, but lobbying is kind of like PR too.
Yeah, they're kind of same in many ways.
yes, indeed. Thank you very much for that. And I still believe, that after being here for, well, quite a while and seeing how, lobbying and public relations are done, I think that they do need, some people who have, Japanese people who have lived overseas, or foreigners, who love Japan, to find, to do that public relations for them. It's a strange observations. I believe that many people might disagree with this, but it's how it is actually, All right, so thank you very much. With this, if there are no other questions or comments, I would like to wrap up the room and proceed with closing it. Is everybody happy with this?
I would like to say something, please.
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, so go-to campaign in Japan allocated 2 trillion, $20 billion US dollars, but yet in order to inoculate Japanese population fully, it's cost less than 10 billions. But nobody's talking about that, and nobody's saying why Japanese government is wasting time and money and all these mambo or Hijoujitai Sengen. I have no idea why media or people or newspaper even talking about that cost efficiency and lack of leadership. Am I too sarcastic, or am I too somewhere else?
No, I think those are great topics of conversation. It's just that those conversations are being had elsewhere. not here in Japan. You know, the press here is not completely a free press, and you need to watch what you say and be polite and deferential if you want to continue to have access and have people return your phone calls. I mean, I practice that here on this call too, although it sometimes doesn't seem like it. But yeah, there's a lot to be said about leadership and about how money is spent, and you know, sometimes
it's taxpayers' money for Nichon and for go to and inoculate entire population is less than 1兆円. It's so laughable to me.
No, there
I
are
rest my
many
case.
laughable things. Like, I don't remember exactly how much, but we spent like $500,000 to distribute the masks, you know, early on in the pandemic. I thought it was ridiculous.
But those were good-looking masks, you have to admit.
Of course. Yeah, I was really disappointed. But
Yeah,
I thought, you know, Japan is so well known for, you know, all these logistics and administration of things. So I was hoping that once they got the secured vaccination, to roll out those vaccines would be going smooth and much faster than any other countries. But it's so behind. I don't know why. How come?
Yeah, I think they spend money on things that consume money rather than the
Just for the
issues at
sake
hand.
of spending?
Well, for example, the athletes and the supporters and the newspaper writers who entered Japan, initially it started with just the foreign travelers with the vaccine, to be able to track them through GPS. Did they go to the hibernation center? Did they stay in the hotel for 3 weeks? You know, tracking individuals so that they followed the rules and the regulations. They came up with another idea, building on that, so that the foreigners that are coming in, we can track them through GPS and follow that, make sure that they're not doing the things that they shouldn't be doing. It doesn't mean that they have to go to the hibernation center for 2 weeks because of the
But
Olympics.
those are for the Olympics, athletes and delegations that you're talking about, right? I'm talking about the vaccines for the general population, for the common citizens. How come it's so behind? And so I really don't know why the government couldn't secure enough vaccine.
No, they secured enough vaccines. They have a surplus of vaccines. They're sitting in refrigerators. There's more than enough vaccines to inoculate the entire country.
So they couldn't figure out how to implement it? It's not the shortage of the vaccine itself.
It's not the shortage of vaccines. No, it's not. And last week they flew, 1 million vaccines to Taiwan. So they have a surplus here. It's the rollout. That's why Konotaro is so disappointed and angry, and that's why the SDF finally came in to do inoculation centers, because the municipalities couldn't handle it. And now the discussion is it's rolling out. The SDF forces did establish it. They're administering the Moderna vaccine. The 65 and older are all going through. They have 22% handled right now, which is pretty good, because in this conversation 2 weeks ago, it was around 2%. So that's a huge change. And now they're inviting chambers of commerce, universities, large companies like Toyota to vaccinate their own people and their families there. So there is great progress being made. My point about the GPS is that in the context of COVID, we have this opportunity to spend even more money. So let's get this facial recognition. Let's get this retina recognition so that we can spend more money, and it really doesn't work. And even when we roll it out, the foreign press goes crazy and says, you will not track me on GPS. And so they had to back off of that. But that's a recent piece of news. I don't know if everybody's up to speed on it, but just the enormous amounts of money that are being spent for things that, the Americans they do that too.
I just wanted to add on the point on why the vaccination rollout was delayed or was slow in Japan was that the government actually insisted on doing the local clinical trials before the vaccine was actually given to the citizens, and because Pfizer and Moderna, they have all tested. The trials happened outside of Japan and basically on those countries. So the government insisted in doing these trials locally so that they can make sure that it actually creates those antibodies among the citizens, so that there are no other side effects or implication in terms of the health. So that delayed the whole process of rolling out the vaccine to its citizens.
Indeed, yes. Oh, yes, Hidetada.
Thank you, Ravi. It's really the backward of a Kosei Rodosho regulation that they don't allow many or any trial outside of Japan is considered as the evidence to consider whether the vaccine or any drug to be safe in Japan. So, thank you.
Part of that makes sense. It's been genetically proven that Japanese have longer stomachs, so of course you have to put the steering wheel on the left-hand side. So there is a logic to this this resistance, and it is, it's an inoculation, so it's pretty serious. But warp speed in the United States has a different meaning here in Japan, obviously.
Well, thank you for that. Good. Right. Any other questions? Any other comments at the moment on the topic?
The warp speed in United States was $20 billion dumping to clinical trial at the third stage of a clinical trial. And on top of that, the company were encouraged to organize the production line at the same time, even before emergency authorization. That was a warp speed. So totally different ball game that we're talking about.
Oh yeah. Well, also there's the part about freedom of liability, right? Which was a part of that package too.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Well, with this once again, I'll try to say that I would like to wrap up the room, and so today we talked about four different topics: the COVID, Olympics, Mr. Suga, and geopolitics, and also at the end of the day we touched upon a few other things like the defense and what was that? Oh, so many things anyway. So I would like to say once again, so this conversation has been recorded. It will be available for listening later next week at Japan Expert Insights. If you would like to hear some parts of it again, please go there and listen to it. In the meantime, Timothy and I will be listening to you if you would like to talk about some different topics, specific themes next time or the time afterwards. So please let us know either via Messenger or LinkedIn so that we can prepare for that. And thank you very much everybody for staying with us for 2 hours and 30 minutes already. So Timothy.
Wow.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maya. And thank you, everybody. Next week is going to be, once again, very active. There was a fellow with the Japan Olympic Committee, actually a bean counter, one of the finance fellows, who killed himself a week ago tomorrow. So there will be more that comes out of that. It's a startling thing to happen. Any suicide is, but with somebody as prominent as that, with the Olympics and the amount of money that we were talking about just being frivolously spent, a topic of our late conversation today. That will be more in the news. The GPSing of all of the visitors coming in, that decision kind of came out on Thursday or Friday. There will be much more backlash on it in this week. Mr. Suga will return from his trip, and we will be we will be entering into the Tokyo metropolitan elections at that point. So next week, there's plenty to talk about. Please stay tuned. I really appreciate you guys being interested in Japanese politics, as sometimes dour and square as it might sound. It really is something that you need to keep an eye on, and to me, it's intensely interesting, and I love this country. I wish it was doing better, and if we all contribute, we can make it better. So thank you very much for staying tuned.
Thank you, Timothy. And thank you, Hayato and Tomomi, Hidetada, Ravi, and Tomomi. So, I'm going to close the room in about 30
Thank
seconds.
you, everybody.
And we're looking forward to seeing you again next week. For the moment,
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye bye.